It's no small challenge, but it's not enough to demobilize potential opponents. You got to raise the cost of opposition as high as possible. Fines, jail terms, job loss, kids get thrown out of school, no visas to go abroad, right? You raise the stakes, the costs against opposition, against political mobilization. That's known as demobilizing the opposition. That's really important, but that's not enough. Because sometimes the costs are really high and people pay them anyway. And then what do you do? And the answer is, point number 3, you have to be able to mobilize in the street, right? You need your own rent-a-crowd or mobilized crowd ready to go into action as pro-regime mobilization. This is a point that's not well understood. In Iran, in the summer of 2009, there were 3 million people in the streets of Tehran. 3 million. That's a pretty sizable number. Mobilized in opposition. 3 million demanding change. That regime didn't fold. It's still there. It's 3 years later. Right? There were all sorts of talk and prediction about that regime was in trouble. But that regime is able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of its own supporters. So-called Basij, so-called Revolutionary Guards, various militia groups, some of whom are there because they're paid, and most of whom are there because they have a belief system and they're paid. It's always nice when those things dovetail. So you need to be able to mobilize serious crowds. Anybody who doesn't have pro-regime mobilization is not in the game anymore in authoritarianism. Because you think your thugs are ready to go, you think, you've got them all paid and puffed up, they're all fattened up like holiday turkeys, and there's not going to be any trouble, and nobody's going to hit the streets because you're going to throw their kids out of school, or you're going to cut the visas off, and they won't be able to go to London for the next semester, or whatever it might be. And then poof, the streets are full of people all of a sudden. So you need to be able to get your people out in the streets in so-called counter demonstrations, pro-regime mobilization. Okay. The fourth characteristic of authoritarian regimes. You'll see where this is going if you bear with me. I'm not that far from the end. You need to be able to manipulate, or better yet, control life opportunities. This is really, really important. Manipulate or control life opportunities, right? Here in the United States, we have basically 3 paths. College or university, you're on that path, right? College or university, that's the path that you're on. The Army, that's the other path. Sometimes paths 1 and 2 overlap, but often they don't. But the Army is a place where people go, they get a job and they get skills. And the third path we have in our society is prison. Those are the basic 3 paths of society in the United States: college, university, the Army, and prison. I'm simplifying a little bit, but if you look at the numbers, that captures just about everybody. So if you can manipulate entrance or non-entrance into one of these life paths, for example, if you can control university entrance, you got a huge lever of power over your society. If you can award, or better yet, deny university entrance, that's a really big deal. If you can award or deny entrance to elite units of the Army, that's a really big deal. If you can award and deny trips abroad because you have an exit visa regime, right? Manipulating or controlling life opportunities is an incredible tool for an authoritarian regime. Those that are unable, even in a small way, to manipulate life opportunities find themselves losing control over the situation and perishing. Now, regimes are, societies are complex, but from the top, from an authoritarian regime point of view, if you're reading along with me the handbook of how to an authoritarian regime, which is what I'm presenting to you today, it actually looks not so complex. You have a certain number of universities and a certain number of university slots, and there's a president or a rector of that university, and you can summon that person to your office and explain to them, the procedures for getting into that university or not. Now, state employees are subject to state commands. And so, if you got a nice state company, maybe it's an oil company, maybe it's a chemical company, maybe it's just a car company. There's going to need to be a lot of executives there. Well, you can give people executive jobs or you can not give people executive jobs. So the more statified your economy is, the more control potentially you might have over your life opportunities. Okay, that was point number 4. If things are scarce and if they're state, you got power. Now, you can do it all. It could be rationing of milk. It could get right down to the level of staples in the diet that you can control if you have mechanisms of control down in well-organized, mobilized community leaders. Anyway, the rewarding of loyalty and the punishment of disloyalty. Housing, even milk, as I say. Okay. 5th, you got to have influence, better yet control, over the key media. You got to own and or manage the television stations. It's just an absolute must. Internet is now also a must. Before it was a desirable, but now for an authoritarian regime, it's an absolute must. Now, it's nice if you can voluntarily get armies of people to enforce on a nationalist basis censorship and control over the internet, but that's hard work. That's like 24/7. You need to get your story out and you need to block other stories, right? Because censorship is both the denial of certain forms of information and thinking and the promotion of certain forms of information, right? Censorship has a proactive dimension, not just denial. If you have no control over the public sphere, you're playing with fire. You don't have to have 100% control. There can be all sorts of pockets of things that go on that you don't control. Small market magazines, little tiny TV stations that don't reach anybody, right? Newspapers that nobody reads, right? There are places where you don't have to control. You can husband your resources if you have limited resources and control over the public sphere. By the way, after this lecture, you get a certificate and you go to try this in one of your own authoritarian regimes. You get to go try it in real life. That's part of having gotten into Dartmouth. I do this myself at Princeton. I'm the vice dean of the policy school. Okay. 6th, you need to have a narrative. You need to have a story about who you are. And it has to have some purchase in the society. You need to have a well. And that well has to be a place where you can go, obviously when you get in trouble, and put the bucket down and bring up some big story. The story of foreign subversion. That's a big story, right? Somebody from the outside who's trying to get you. Foreign subversion is huge, especially if it connects to funny-looking people inside your country too, like ethnic minorities or religious minorities, right? That's a great thing to have in the well. You can pull that puppy up just about any time. Plausible external threat. The IMF, that's a great one. That works for just about every regime. The IMF. Look what they're trying to do to us. They're trying to take away our sovereignty. They're trying to make us do things for their benefit. The US, whoever you went to war with in the 12th or 11th century, it's all down in that well. You're going to put the bucket and lift it up. NGOs that receive foreign grants. NGOs, what's that? Does anybody believe that they're really non-governmental, that they're not taking the orders of the governments that give them grants, that fund them, that then come into our country and try to subvert our values and try to get our young people to work for them? Naive liberals, that's huge too. That's always in the bucket. They're always a subversive force. They think they're doing good, but they're in the pay of the foreigners, and they're subverting our country. Naive liberals are huge. Anyway, you get the picture, right?